So we're on and it's after 1. So let's start our meeting.
Yes, because I have a meeting at 2 and I have to get there, so.
Okay. So I put together this list of items that we need to discuss and chew on and make some decisions. So there was a clear positive reaction by the mayor and city council to the presentation on where we were. So the next step is really getting into the details of the zoning regs and see where we need to make changes. So the first place that I went to was the purpose statement for the annex res and annex mixed. And let's see, the first thing, let me get to that page, 9743, was in the purpose statement, do we need items 2 and 3? Because I think we've covered them now in the new subregs. So items 2 and 3 had to do with conserve open land, including those areas containing unique and sensitive natural resources, such as woodlands, streams, floodplains, and wetlands, by setting them aside from development.
If it's covered in the subdivision.
I think, Nancy? You're muted.
Sorry, I wonder if we do need them. And I guess I have to say personally, I get a little confused sometimes between when we're annexing something before or in the process of being built, or annexing something that's already built. And perhaps this is a question for Janelle. So if we're annexing something that's already built and there are open spaces, but those open spaces and community areas actually haven't necessarily been listed as protected or identified clearly as open spaces that are to remain open spaces, how is that handled?
So
Maybe we need this here to, in a sense, make sure that that is handled.
So if a previously developed subdivision development commercial is going to come into the annex into the city, they will most likely not request the annexation zoning classifications. They'll probably ask for more closely related zoning classification that fits the lot sizes and the uses that's already there. This is just an option if you're going to annex. Typically we see this with greenfields and open space. When they want to develop as they come in, they would pick one of these, the AX res or the AX mixed zoning districts. Typically, if it's already developed, you're going to come in with the R2, the R1, or commercially zoning is what they'll request.
And if that piece of land coming in has open space that hasn't been identified as open space, can they come in and then, build stuff onto it?
So if there's if there's a subdivision that's coming in and they have open space as part of their subdivision, they're not going to be able to develop that open space, because that open space, one, as recorded on their plan, is part of the required open space that they needed. And then two, if they come in, then they would probably, again, it's an existing development, but the city probably would not allow them to, again, as they can't condition an annexation that way with actually they probably could, is that
I think they could. That's why I'm asking.
they're not going to be able, because typically where your open space is where your stormwater management is. A lot of places you're not going to be able to develop that because you need that. And then typically if it's an existing development, the homeowners are probably not going to want to get rid of that open space. And typically if it's already identified as open space in the record plan, because I've had this question happen in previous places I've worked, is they had more open space than was required. They had like 50 or something percent, and they had a parcel that was identified as open space, and they were told if they wanted to be able to develop it, they'd have to get 51% of the HOA to okay it, and then it would still have to go through a city process or a county process. So, but typically you're not seeing development of the open space because it's already identified as that. Or if a property comes in, they could come in as residential, and the open space could actually be zoned open space, the OS zoning classification to allow, then that would limit the ability to develop that. So they could actually come in if a development, if a subdivision wants to come in and has open space, they could ask for that, for the open space to be zoned, the open space zoning, and then the rest to have some type of residential zoning.
And then if they came in, they would be subject to the new regs anyway, right?
So they would only be subject, again, if we're talking about existing houses,
Right.
they would most likely be non-conforming in regards to setbacks, because county setbacks are different than ours. Which is why I think when Highland Acres came in, they got the R1 because it was the closer resemblance to what was there for lot sizes and setbacks, but most of those are still non-conforming regarding to setbacks. So they would end up being a non-conforming structure within
But
the city.
if they had excess land that didn't have to become open space and they wanted to subdivide that new area would be
Would have to
subject.
go through whatever the subdivision
Right.
process is.
Okay.
Yes.
Does that make you any more comfortable, Nancy?
Maybe. I guess I kind of like the idea of leaving number 2 there, but just because I think we don't say a lot in the new subdivision code about woodlands, floodplains, et cetera, because that's the kind of thing that typically comes under zoning, not under the subdivision.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't have a problem. I'm just trying to clean it up a little.
Yeah, no, maybe obviously it's a good question. I'm just, trying to think through the wrinkles of it.
Right. And then number 3 is provide development options for landowners which minimize impacts on sensitive environmental resources, reduce disturbance of natural and cultural features, and conserve scenic views. So again, I think the environmental resources are covered. Well, maybe not.
Maybe not, yeah.
Reduce disturbance of natural and cultural features and conserve scenic views. Conserve scenic views is not something we've been very successful at. And we don't have any really guidelines on that at all. So it's kind of, if you're on a scenic road, you have to go to the Byways Commission.
There's the old joke about it be a great scenic road, but all these trees keep getting in the way.
Well, don't get me started on scenic roads. So again, would you prefer to leave this in?
Nancy, we can't hear you.
I keep muting myself not to disturb everyone. It's not in, I guess I'm asking myself in my mind 2 questions. One is it in conflict with something else? And I don't think it is. Does it fill any gaps that aren't there? And is it something that typically one would expect to see in the zoning section?
Well, I think some of these things should be in this. Well, I guess they are mostly the protections of environmental resources are mostly in the zoning right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah.
particularly where you find them, because the subdivision code is about how you develop the land and then how it also complies with the zoning code. So I know there's the tree ordinance going around. I know there's a couple of tree ordinance subcommittee going around. And, those are things that make sense in the zoning code. But specifically for this one, because I think there's actually in the annexation zones, they get into like the cluster a little bit more. And maybe that's where you want to leave that in to better support that section. I'm just here to take notes and.
Okay, well, we can, again, we
No, and provide expert advice. Come on now.
can. Okay, and then number 4 is, I think we're sort of replacing number 4, which is provide greater design flexibility and efficiency in the siting of, and here it's odd, it says services and infrastructure, including the opportunity to reduce the length of roads, utilities, and the amount of paving and impervious surface required for residential development.
There's where
I thought it went beyond services and infrastructure, but
It's a peculiar purpose statement.
Mhm.
I mean, we certainly want more design flexibility, but the rest of it doesn't seem to jive quite the
That
way.
mentions sidewalks too at all? Is there-
Doesn't mention sidewalks. It
Sidewalks.
says length of roads, utilities, and amount of paving and impervious surface required for residential development.
And I think with the subdivision code, we addressed the width of the road to narrow that, because I think that's what was the intent of this, was instead of requiring them 32-foot wide roads, was to
Right.
get those
Yeah.
roads a little bit narrower,
Yeah,
which again, then reduces your lot coverage. So I think the subdivision code actually addressed like the back half of that purpose
Yeah.
statement.
yeah.
mhm.
So we could leave just provide greater design flexibility. Maybe.
Creative, yes.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. All right, and then I think what we need to propose are a couple of additions to encourage sociable pedestrian-oriented neighborhoods patterned on the city of Lewis and traditional neighborhood design principles. Would be one additional purpose. And then another would be incorporate a sense of place and identity with a central flexible community open space. Provide greater design flexibility, which we've already, let me take that one out. And then encourage interconnection of streets and walkways, both internally and externally. And respect neighboring development with similar density and building heights. And we may just want to say building scale rather than heights.
Mhm. The traditional neighborhood design principles that are capitalized, are these clearly I guess I'm trying to figure out, is this a document that someone could, I mean, we've had the presentations on it. I believe I understand, what it is. But is there a single source that someone goes to see those principles? And will those principles change over time?
Janelle, do you think that APA has any?
I think there's
listing?
some documentation about complete streets, traditional neighborhood design. Let me look into it.
Okay,
I just want to make sure we're referencing something that, we couldn't wake up tomorrow and someone's changed to be something we really don't agree with. And also that we're referencing something
we'll
that,
see if we can find a reference then.
yeah, you
Okay,
could go to and know what's meant,
right.
We could always
Okay.
add a definition.
I think
Oh,
those are
that's a good idea.
great additions.
Okay,
Question I have about number 7 is that it would be it's like duplexes or townhomes. Even if we were zoned for it, if there's none in the adjacent to it, we never see a townhome. We'd have to do any objections for that. If we don't have similar density and the building scale.
But what we're saying is we don't want to see an apartment building next to an existing single-family detached neighborhood. That's what we're trying to say there.
That extreme. But a duplex or.
So typically it's, if you've got single family, you want your single family and maybe duplexes next to each other, or a quadplex that looks like a single family. And then as the further you get away from your single family, then you get into your townhouses and then your apartment buildings. So, or you have some type of mix, but you don't, because typically apartment buildings are a little bit taller and bigger than a standard single family house. So you typically want a little bit of separation. So it's like, okay, if we're gonna have a mix of housing types in a development, then we would have, and we've got a single family neighborhood here, then we'd put like maybe a row of single family, and then you can go on the other side of that street into the townhouses and the apartment buildings.
So
But
developer would ease into the design.
Exactly,
Providing a mix.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a,
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah, I interpreted the word respect neighboring development to mean that you would provide that kind of transitioning, not that the whole plot of land would have to be identical in development to the neighbor.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, because then you lose some of that characteristics of,
Mhm.
Even in downtown, you've got, different streets. Well, it all's one big neighborhood, but they've got different characteristics. And so we
Right.
want to play up on those.
And it's further defined if you go down the notes. In number 5, it says in areas adjacent to existing residences, there shall be a transition to the density, housing type, and scale of the adjoining development at the boundary.
Great. Good point.
So, that the one is a purpose, and then here's a little more direction in the notes. And what I noticed is that in some of the zoning, this is the way it's set up. There are purpose statements, and then below them, there may be notes. And so since this is kind of a complicated zone, we've got a lot of notes potentially. Okay, so let's get to the notes then. And this would apply to both the AX res and the AX mixed. So front yard setbacks may vary from 10 feet to 20 feet. Okay, and that's going to be across the board, whether it's single family or towns.
Is it
Or
the same as the subdivision code?
No, the setbacks are in the zoning, not in the subdivision code. So,
Yeah, so here we want to be amending the table at the back.
right.
Yep.
Well, yes, that's right.
Yep.
Okay.
So what is the current table saying? Like how would the 10 to 20 feet vary from the current table?
Currently for the AX res, for dwellings for multiple family, your front yard setback is 30 feet. For agricultural, there isn't one. And then for all other uses, it's 40 feet or the established building line. For the AX res, depending on the option you go with, it goes from 30 feet to the existing building line, 20 feet, 25 feet, or EBL. So it's a range.
So again,
I thought that the 10 feet was only in the situation where you were doing cluster housing.
it is.
Okay.
This would be for the cluster 1 or 2.
Okay.
So currently for the cluster 1 or 2, for the detached, your single family, it's a 30-foot front yard setback or the established building line. For townhouses, it's 20 feet. For your duplexes, it's 20 feet. In cluster option 2, for single family, it's 25 feet or the EBL. For the townhouses, it's 20, and the duplexes, it's 20 feet. Does that help? I can bring it up if you want.
And here's part of my question is, since we're allowing the streets to be narrower, I'm getting concerned that we're going to be creating some areas where it's, really compressed in terms of, narrower streets, shorter setbacks, increased cluster density around them, and
It's reflecting the old Lewis. I mean,
That's exactly it.
That's a
We're
small town
trying.
look, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess so. Yeah.
I mean, I went around taking pictures of porches, and I was amazed at how many almost sit right on the sidewalk. There may be
Yeah.
2 or 3 feet exactly between the sidewalk and the porch. And that has an intimacy to me that says you're in Old
Mhm.
Lewis, and also the porch is a sociable part of the home. It's quasi-public, and you see someone on the porch, you say hi. It's part of that sociable environment that we're trying to create.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think the one thing we don't want to do is, there certainly are areas in Lewis where when you come down from someone's front porch, you may take your life and limb in hand, because you're stepping off onto a sidewalk that is so close to the actual street where cars are going.
Well, that's why we're saying 10 feet. Now, Janelle, is a porch allowed in the 10-foot setback?
Yes, open unenclosed structures can encroach 10 feet. So that's where we're gonna have to be careful, because if you're creating a front yard setback of 10 feet, then they can actually encroach to the property line, which typically you don't want to do.
Right.
So I would suggest, if you're going to make a minimum front yard, at least 15 feet, because then at least you have 5 feet of grass in front. So because the encroachments that are allowed to encroach 10 feet into the front yard setback. So you're not, as Nancy was pointing out, right on top of that sidewalk. But that's just a suggestion and that way you get a little bit of grass.
And I think that's especially important when we're going to have streets that may only have parking on one side, which means, the actual movement of cars is occurring so close to the property line.
Okay, so should we change those numbers from 10 to 15 and 25? Does that sound better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, then the next one is residential structures shall be oriented to existing streets and shall vary in type, size, style, and price. Now, maybe it should say facades of structures.
I would
Should be
agree with that,
oriented.
and I'm not sure how we're gonna get around the price issue. How we can actually dictate that in code,
Mhm.
as much as I would love to.
Well, if you're saying size, type, and style, that's basically
That
setting the
does get you to
price,
the
yeah,
price, but
yeah.
without.
Yeah.
Because you can buy a townhouse and it can be almost the same amount as a single family house, and
Like affordability.
so I'm just throwing that one out there.
Okay,
But I like the.
Yeah. And even if you could say they have to vary in price, it's like vary by how much, it's, if
Right.
this one's $1 more, is that variation? Yeah.
right, yeah. Okay, that gets next. Okay, and then garages or communal parking areas shall be located to the rear of a residential structure and accessed via an alley or driveway. Where this is not feasible, the garage shall be set back a minimum of 6 feet from the facade.
What was the setback that we said in the new subdivision code, the exact number of feet? I can't remember.
I don't think we put one.
Oh, no, there is a setback for the garage.
Back for the garage. Okay, give me just a minute.
I'm pretty sure there is.
It was something like 5 feet more than the front of the house.
Let me look.
My house is set back 6 feet from the garage. My garage is out front. The house is back.
Right.
Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out where to find this. There we go.
I think it's even on the slides. Let me see if I can find it.
Let me find it and we can come back to that one.
Okay.
How's that work out?
Okay, so my thought was, when I started to look at how a townhouse development might happen, it occurred to me that rather than doing garages in the rear, that the developer might just want to do a parking lot in the rear, which would be fine. You know, so again, we're trying to encourage flexibility, so that's why I added that. And the garage setback, you know, whatever number we pick is fine. It's as
Okay.
long as it's not in front.
Attached
Yeah.
garages that face the street shall be set back at least 5 feet from the front facade.
Okay, so we don't need this then.
Correct.
Great. Okay, so we just take that out. Excellent. Okay, then the next one is highly recommended features. Front porches, variable front setbacks, narrow streets, and organically shaped stormwater management. That's, whoops. That's,
White males.
most of them are organically shaped.
Oh, okay.
Is there any other recommended feature that we want to encourage?
How about the open space things from subdivision? Are they somewhere?
So all the subdivision open space requirements
Are in the
are in the
subregs.
subdivision, so these have to be subject to those. And I think there's actually some extra items in the cluster subdivision, because again, if you're doing cluster options 1 or 2, then you follow the cluster subdivision code.
Is this where we could say variable facades?
Yes.
Okay.
Or material choices, it might be the same house, but it's got a different, one can be siding, one can be brick, one's got stone, so it's a variable.
Let's add that.
Front design.
All right, and then the next item is in areas adjacent to existing residences, there shall be a transition to the density, housing type, and scale of the adjoining development at the boundary. Any comments?
Sounds kind of harsh.
Well, if the house is, you know, half a mile away, we don't want to impose it. It's only where we're adjoining it
At the property line.
at the property line, yeah.
We say property line instead of boundary. I mean, it just sounds
Sure.
like it's a keep out type of thing. you know?
Oh, sure.
It's,
Yeah,
Property line is more specific.
Yeah.
Yes.
yes, yes.
Boundary line.
Okay, and then where pedestrian paths connect to existing or potential future larger systems, an easement shall be granted for public usage. Now, I threw this one in the last minute because of the recent issue with Mariners Retreat, where the city's asked to use the pathways for the bike route, and the developer said no. If we had an easement on the pathways, if the city had an easement, then the public can use it but the developer or the homeowners association still gets to maintain it.
Mhm.
Easement connecting it to Highland Acres.
No, I think that's fee simple. I think it's a fee simple strip. That's an open space.
That's owned by the HOA.
Yeah.
Connecting,
Now, I think the city should ask again when the HOA takes over the open space, because they're not in charge yet. I have a friend who lives there. And
they're sold out though. I mean, they're on the
So
verge.
maybe it's something like we were talking before the meeting about the private streets, but they're dedicated to public use. So if there's, because the sidewalks are of course in the right of way, but if there's a path that connects, that it can be owned by the HOA, but they're dedicated for public use.
exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. Now, I think we'd want Glenn to look at this too, because, does it imply any kind of liability on the part of the city? I don't know. But that's something we definitely need to ask Glenn. Okay. Now, some other issues that I raised in the presentation was, and we've talked a little bit about this, is linkage of housing types to number of units. So if there are 25 units in the subdivision, you can have one housing type. It could be all single families, it could be all towns, whatever. But if you go over that, if you go to 25, you need 2, or 26, you need 2 housing types. And then, so you would need 2 up to 50. And then maybe it's 3 when you get to 75, or, whatever. I don't know exactly what the numbers should be, but, we can talk about that. But do we want to have this as part of the code?
I would suggest.
I
yeah.
think it's a nice idea. Yes, I think it's a good idea.
I do too. I would probably tend to reduce the numbers a little bit, like 1 to 18 or something like that. But
1 to 20,
yeah,
40.
I mean, 20,
didn't see you-
20 houses is a lot.
Mhm.
Townhomes is a lot.
Nancy, any opinion here?
Yeah, I'm fine with reducing it to 20.
Okay, so
How about larger numbers? Like if you got 75 or 100, as you suggested.
what do you mean?
Well, I like the idea, okay?
Mhm.
So if you have, we said 20 houses,
Right,
you have 1. If you have 50 houses, you have 2, or 40 houses. If you have 75 or 80 or 100, do you need an additional type or 2?
Is it 2 types per 50 houses, or is 50 a threshold? Once you're over 50, as long as you have 2 types, you're done.
I
we
think that's the
can keep
question.
going. That's the question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're
I just wondered what your intention was. Yeah.
20 and under, you can be all of one type. If you're 40 and between 20 and 40, you've got to have 2 different types. If you want to get over 40, 2 or 3 different types.
How many housing types are there? I mean, if we're talking, because this is really talking about, duplex, single family, duplex. I don't know, is
Yeah.
like fourplex a different type? And
There is a fourplex and a quadplex, and yeah, there's a ton of different housing types, but the ones that we recognize in the code are single family, townhouses, and duplexes.
Okay.
But again, if you want to allow for a quadplex, again, that can look very much like a single family. That's something that, you can consider here.
Well, I'm just concerned that we're being too constraining.
yeah, that's what I would be worried about if we start getting over.
Or encourage 3 or 4 different housing types over that to at least get that in there, if that's what you're thinking.
But I think they should be bigger numbers. I'm struggling with this. I don't know what's,
I don't think you have a development that gets much bigger than that. I mean, the land is not available.
Mhm.
And then is it economical to do that?
exactly.
Yeah,
That does actually come into play, just
Yeah, I mean, 2 housing types is reasonable, I think. I think once you get into 3, you really,
Okay,
you'd need a substantial
parcel of land.
parcel of land. I agree.
okay.
So what numbers do we want to use?
20 and 40.
Say it again.
20 and 40. That's
Well,
what you said.
it
but
would be
again,
1 to 20.
Yeah, I thought that's what Bob proposed was 1 to 20, 2 to 40.
Well, we really wouldn't have, if we're not going to go more than 2 housing types, then we wouldn't have to limit the top end.
Right.
That's right.
1 to 20 and then 21 plus is 2 types.
It's 2 types. Yes.
Okay.
If that's what you guys want to do.
Mhm.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, I know, Melanie, you have these written as like notes, but I'm thinking maybe we update the clusters section of the code and put these here and there. Because for the AX res, you're either doing a conventional subdivision or the cluster option 1 or the cluster option 2.
Mhm.
So they'd have more meat and more in the cluster section, which is tied to the annexation zones.
Is that the only area where you can do a cluster?
Let me go back to that section of the code because I just brought it up. Because I think. Yes,
Oh, okay. In that case, that's fine.
cluster is
That's fine.
for AX res and AX mix.
Okay, and then the next item on other issues is single family, reducing the setback from 10 feet to 20 feet. To vary from 10 feet to 20 feet, rather than being 30 feet. Or 25, which is, so it would
I
just
think there we just want to, I'm back to the porches and whatnot and making sure that you
25,
can
okay.
come off your porch safely.
Okay, 15 to 25. And then for 2-family dwellings, the minimum lot area, reducing it to 5,000 square feet from 8, which is currently in option 1. And in option 2, it's 6,000. So that's in option 1, that would be a substantial reduction. And maybe that's too much.
And when we're doing this, I'm trying to think of the impact on overall density.
The smaller your lot size, the more houses you can have
Potentially.
potentially.
But
And
remember,
we're not making any other, so, okay, here's the way my thinking is going. The smaller the lot sizes, the more houses you have, the more people you have, the more parking you have, and we've narrowed the streets and we're saying just parking on one side. And we're not saying anything about increasing open space or parking in that situation. I'm just, we want intimate, but we don't want crowded people arguing over parking spaces and,
So the good
Well-
thing about, if I may,
go ahead.
is the open space requirements for cluster options 1 and 2 go from 30% to 50%. So if you're cluster option 1, you're already at 30% open space. Doesn't matter what housing type. If you're cluster option 2, your minimum open space is 50%.
Okay,
And my thought on doing some of these reductions is, is it possible that we might get some affordable housing by making
Yeah.
allowances? Because
I
most,
think that's a great thought, yeah.
the developer wants to put the biggest possible house on the lot, but if we
Yeah.
make the lot smaller, do we get some benefit of more affordability because everything is going to have to be smaller?
And you're still keeping the lot coverage at what? At
Well,
50
I was trying to test that a little bit. And the coverage that I was having issues with was in the townhouse coverage. Because I was having difficulty getting to the 65%. And I thought maybe we should raise that to 70%. But that's coming up, I think. Did I bring that up?
You have lot coverage as your last item. I think that
Yeah.
maybe is where you're going to call.
It's on the back page, back
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
It's 2 pages.
Yeah, okay, so that's coming up. So that's one we I don't know,
I'm sorry, the 5,000 is coming down from what number?
in cluster option 1, the 2-family dwelling is 8,000 square feet. And what is it in the code for that type of development? Didn't we reduce that to 5,000?
Just a minute. The lot area is 6,000,
6,000,
which means each unit has to have 3,000.
3,000, right?
So this would actually be less than that in the R4 zoning district.
Well, maybe in cluster option 1, we leave it at 6, or change it to 6, I should say.
Mhm.
And maybe in cluster option 2, we reduce it to 5. Now, again, that's a minimum. If the developer wants to do a bigger lot, he can do a bigger lot.
Yeah.
How does that sound to everybody? 6,000 on 1 and 5,000 on 2.
Okay.
Can I ask, if you have a townhouse development and how many parking spaces are required for, how many off-street parking spaces are required for each townhouse?
2.
And if we have the narrower road with parking just on one side, if the curb on that side is broken up by curb cuts for 2-car driveways for each of those houses, is there actually any public parking left?
Hopefully the
Well-
parking will be in the back.
Yeah, for the townhouses, you really couldn't do that.
I mean, I see lots of townhouse developments that have parking in the front of the house.
Right, and we're saying, no, you have to park around the back.
Or on the street.
Well, you have to have 2 off-street parking spaces. That's a requirement.
Behind the house.
That's
I
another,
saw garages or communal parking areas shall be located to the rear. I didn't see driveways have to be to the rear. Do we actually, I'm just trying to make sure, do we actually say that anywhere?
Yeah, because there's nothing saying you have to provide the alley.
There's nothing, the alley's optional, you know?
well, how are you going to get to it then?
Well,
If
you
it's-
can put the driveway off the front and then your garage is just in the back, or it's front to back, but you still have the driveway off the front of the house.
But you can't do that with townhouses.
Townhouses, yeah, that would be more
I
difficult.
think they can.
Well, if they don't have garages, they can just have a straight out driveway.
They don't have to have a garage.
Correct.
Not every house has a garage, right?
They can
Not
be,
every
Well,
dwelling
people
has a,
have 2 off-street parking spaces, so they either have a garage or they have a communal parking area.
Dutchman's Harvest, didn't they just eliminate the garages and put in driveways?
yeah, but that's a completely different thing. But I mean, you look at, you can have your driveway in the front of your house and your driveway can take up the width of 20 feet wide. And that you can have your driveway in the front. There's
yeah,
nothing limiting your driveway from being in the front of the house. It's just saying your garage,
You have a driveway without a garage, and that'll be your off-street parking.
correct?
that's right. And you can have, if you have 2 of them. So my point is, I am concerned about public parking. I think people do come and visit people, and people have friends and family coming over, et cetera. And, having spent time on the, city parking commission, it's hard. There's not a lot of parking. And I don't want us, while I want to duplicate the intimate spaces, I don't want to duplicate that problem.
Well, maybe we just need to make clearer then that parking shall be provided to the rear of dwellings in garages accessed off alleys and or communal parking areas.
I like the idea. I got to figure out how that meets the code requirement of providing 2 off-street parking spaces.
Yeah,
Because having a communal parking space is over here, but that doesn't mean those are mine. The code says I'm supposed to have 2 on my
Well,
parcel.
they
Yeah.
have dedicated spaces.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that, I don't think that works in code at the moment. I'd have to do a little bit of research. Because typically the way it is I've got 2 off-street parking spaces on my property, and that's the parking calculation.
Well, look at Dutchman's Harvest. Weren't there parking spaces in front of the units?
Yeah, but that's more of like an apartment building. So it's a broader item than we're talking about.
But it's meeting code. It's providing
It
2 parking
is.
spaces per. They're not right at the unit, they're on the
Correct.
street.
But
So it's a
if we're
similar.
talking fee simple lots, it's a different animal that I just want to make sure we're not getting in trouble with.
Okay,
Because if it's a fee simple, I want to make sure we're not. That's all I'm worried about is making
Okay.
sure. So I'll look into that one.
okay. All right.
You want to go back to what you said about you want the parking in back, basically.
Right. Now, we got to recognize that that's our preference, but it may not be feasible for every
Mhm.
development for that to occur. That's why we have that out about the
But
garages being set back.
I think you don't want what Janelle suggested people might do is a townhouse, two right in,
The parking right outside.
basically a parking lot.
Mhm.
And they've moved it back from the street or the sidewalk 20 feet so they can get a car in there. And then that's next to another one.
Mhm.
And pretty soon you've got
Pavement here to there, right?
pavement all the way.
yeah,
No space, no green space and no community.
Yeah.
Other than, oh, I
and,
said,
and no street parking.
Well,
Right.
maybe then we make very clear that in townhouse developments, there shall be no parking immediately in front of the unit. No parking spaces immediately.
Okay.
primary park. But
Are we increasing overall impermeability on this land by adding another road behind the townhouses?
I actually did a calculation a while back. In fact, Joe had brought that up to me, that weren't we increasing the impervious? And I compared a 20-foot by 22-foot driveway per unit to a driveway in the back that was basically an alley giving access to garages. And if you do townhouse development, it's definitely not as much impervious as providing driveways, 20 by 20-foot driveways to each unit. It was pretty amazing to me that that's the way it worked out.
Okay. I don't mean to be rude, but I have to get to another meeting at 2.
Okay.
So it sounds like we've got some items still up for discussion. Do you want to
Yes.
set another meeting and then I can take a stab at putting some of this into the code so we can see a mock-up?
Okay,
How does that sound?
that sounds great.
Are you thinking
sounds great.
maybe 2 weeks? Because next week is going to be tough because we're already at Wednesday.
Right.
So we're looking at the week of the 13th. Because that gives me time to get the public notice done for the agenda.
Okay.
Now, we have a planning commission meeting on the 15th,
Correct.
So,
And council meets on the
if we
13th.
can avoid that.
The 14th in the afternoon looks available. Let me double check on that.
I have a 4 o'clock that day that will take me probably 45 minutes to get to, but
Yeah, because we'd have to be done before 4. So the 17th in the morning on Friday is good. And then, yeah. Otherwise, we are busy people.
Thursday morning.
I do not.
I don't.
Okay.
Friday, does everyone have Friday? Friday looks good.
Friday's good for me.
10 or 11 in the morning. Oh, sorry.
By Zoom.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. 10 or 11 a.m. would you like?
I would prefer 11.
Okay.
Gives me time to walk the dog.
All right, 6:17 at 11 a.m. 6:17 at 11 a.m. All right, I'll get that on the calendar. And then I'll try and get a draft of some of this up so you guys can take a look at it.
Okay.
Great.
I will do a calculation. I will bring a calculation on that comparison of alleys and driveways.
Also curious whether we should be adjusting side yard setbacks too. Right now, it's like 8 feet. Should it be?
You can't because in the subdivision code, there's an easement that is 8 feet on the side. So you can't make it less because otherwise you're building into an easement and then we have other issues.
Okay, it has to be 8. Okay.
That would cause other issues.
That's locked.
Okay. All right, we're going to continue to chat a little bit, okay?
Okay, I just.
Oh, you have to turn this off?
Do.
All right.
If you're just gonna chat about non-business stuff, let me go see if I can get somebody to cover, because
No, we needed Nancy. Okay,
needed
we'll
Nancy.
we'll just leave this. I wanted in particular to talk about floodplain, because one thing I noticed there's 2 pages of appendix in the back on the annex zone, and one of them has standards for building in FEMA floodplain zones, AE and VE. And I think we should X that.
Why we put in freeboard and all that stuff, so we can build in floodplains.
Well,
What's the chances of them flooding anyway?
what do you think? Pretty high,
Yeah.
pretty good.
Getting closer.
Okay, so we'll see.
Is this a discussion? I mean, you've given us food for thought, certainly, and it
Yes.
certainly is a discussion I think we all want to have, so.
Right. Okay. Very good. We'll see you all in 2 weeks then, or so.
See you then.
Okay, bye-bye.
What section is that you referred to?
Floodplain.
It's the,
It's floodplain.
way in the back of the zoning is the appendix that has all these standards. Well, it turns out it's not just this page. There's another page. And I saw that and I was like, oh my God, I can't. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So are we going to be in Friday's edition?
No, this was more so just notes. I don't know if there's any, because I know you're building towards something.
Right.
So,
It's filler right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
but I want to make sure I'm taking as much notes and hearing as much as I possibly can.
Great. Okay.
Aaron, how many hours a day do you work?
As some days it does go 12 to 13, but I'm capped at 40, so I have to get very interesting with how I cover things, because I will be at some events at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then there's some meetings that go on until like 9:30, 10 at night. So,
Right.
Creative is the word, yes.
yeah. That's why I can't wait to, I live in Ocean View now, and I'm looking for areas. I'm not gonna move in the summer, but this fall, I just can't wait to get up here. So that'll make my job a little bit easier, because that commute from Ocean View right now is.
Can you afford to live here, though?
That's honestly, no.
Okay.
But if I can save and get some programs, but no, honestly, the way I looked at it and stuff like
Is
that,
this?
I'll probably have to live just outside.
Thank you.
But I mean, that's, I've done my own things, so I didn't save up enough. But at the same token, I do hope that things get a lot better in terms of that, because I love Lewis. I've grown up here my whole life. I've grown up in Ocean.
Provide, yes.
Been coming to
Listen.
Lewis, been looking up at Lewis.
Sure.
And like, what you talk about, the small town, walking around and stuff like that. And it's just something that I hope, people from my generation, which I know people from my generation can live here and do live here and
Yeah.
stuff, but like, I just hope that we're able to get in
Someday.
someday. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. The right way. I'm not trying to force our strong arm our way. Yes.